Less than a week after Donald Trump announced plans to meet Vladimir Putin in Budapest, the proposed summit has already fallen apart. So why is the US president scuppering his own efforts to negotiate peace? I'm Katie Stallard, and this is the New Statesman podcast. I'm here with Freddie Hayward to talk this through. Hi, Freddie.
Hello. So, Katie, you've written about this summit or this non-summit this week. I mean, what's happening? Why are we making or seem to make some progress on the Russia-Ukraine war? My suspicion is that Trump's come out of the Gaza ceasefire deal. He wants to build on that momentum and thinks that he is the deal maker who can finally push this through. What's happened?
I think that is probably how Trump sees it. Here in the real world, I would say that nothing has really changed. I think what has become clear over the past week is that Russia is still just not interested in ending the war, is categorically uninterested in a ceasefire, and seems to believe, with some evidence, that it can play Trump. So if we just back up a little bit, there's a bit of a pattern that I think is becoming evident here. So you have, Trump seems preconditioned to believe the absolute best in Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. But periodically, he gets fed up, he loses patience. So you had, back in the summer, back in July, then Trump for the first time saying, Putin is feeding us a lot of bullshit. Like, we have all these lovely phone conversations, and I get off the phone and I say, well, that was a great talk. And then he bombs Kyiv or somewhere else. So he started seeming to get fed up then, and he set a 50-day timeline and then a 10-day timeline for Putin to agree to a ceasefire, or there were going to be these very severe sanctions going into place, which, of course, then never happened. So right as that deadline was due to expire, Putin and Trump got on the phone. Yeah. And it's unclear who suggested it, but the outcome was they were going to have this big summit in Alaska. So then suddenly gone was any idea of sanctions, serious consequences. It was all about, they're coming to Alaska, they're going to do a great peace deal. Maybe they'll even just call Zelenskyy to come and join them there, which of course was nowhere close to anything that was ever going to happen. Putin was clearly playing for time. He emerged from that summit looking very pleased with himself and with some reason. And we sort of went back to the status quo. So here again, it has seemed in the past few weeks that Trump is getting fed up with Putin. You have this sort of chorus from Europe again of like, oh, he's definitely coming around to Ukraine's side. He definitely seems to be changing his position on Putin. There was the tweet or truth about, maybe Ukraine can get all of its land back. And then I think the key point was he started flirting openly with, maybe we're going to send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Yeah. Long-range missiles that would be very, very useful to Ukraine. We knew that Zelenskyy was coming out here to Washington to discuss it. So then, lo and behold, on the eve of that conversation, Putin gets back on the phone with Trump again. And the outcome is another proposed summit. This time in Budapest. We can get into why that was a particularly controversial place to suggest the summit. But the idea was Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, and his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, were going to meet presumably in Budapest this week to set up the details. And then Putin and Trump would meet in the coming weeks. It's generally always in about 2 weeks' time in Trump's timeline. So he sort of announced it as, building on, as you say, peace in the Middle East. And he noted that Putin had congratulated him on that and said, you've achieved something that we've all been, trying to do for centuries. So he was going to build on that one peace deal to go straight into now the next peace deal. But of course, that was never in the Russian idea. Lavrov and Rubio get on the phone and it becomes apparent that no, Russia is not remotely interested in a ceasefire. Russia is still holding out for its original maximalist demands. So then, as we understand it, Rubio then went back to Trump and said, there's nothing to discuss in a summit. You shouldn't go to Budapest. So the summit was off. But I think that we got here is evidence of just, Trump's continuing willingness to believe the best in Putin and continuing surprise that no, Putin actually really isn't looking to negotiate peace here. He's pressing ahead with the war and he's sort of playing Trump and dragging him along in the process. So no Tomahawks for Ukraine, another reported shouting match when Trump and Zelensky met in the Oval Office last week. Really no further forward, but again, more time for Putin to continue his war.
I think people overdo the comparisons between the negotiations in Israel and Gaza and in Ukraine, but it is interesting that we only really got a ceasefire in the Middle East once Trump applied pressure to Netanyahu. That was a key moment. That was a key change after the Israelis bombed Doha. That was when Trump got offended and then started to apply this pressure to Netanyahu, both in public and private. Do you think we are making any progress in terms of, well, when Trump does apply that pressure, when he does say, actually, Ukraine might be able to kick Russia out of the entire country, and when he suggests that there will be tomahawks, is there some progress there, do you think, or is it all just an illusion?
I think there's kind of two related problems. The first is that the person Trump has real leverage over and has demonstrated in the past is Zelensky. And he has proven more than willing to use that leverage and to push and prod Zelensky to the negotiating table. The problem is Zelensky is not in a position to stop the war. I mean, even if he gave everything Putin wants right now, there's no reason to believe the war wouldn't continue. If anything, that would embolden Putin to press forward. And now he would want Kyiv rather than just the eastern half of Ukraine. Yeah. So he doesn't have great leverage over Putin. And the leverage he does have over Putin, he's consistently shown he's not prepared to use. So I think it's partly he's undercut his position continually up until this point over the first 6 months of his presidency. He's talked this big game, he's made all these threats, and then he hasn't followed through. And Putin, I think, looks at him as somebody who, Putin is a long, very experienced former KGB case officer. He's very, very good at reading human beings. And I think he thinks he's got Trump's mark, because I think the other point that, if Trump had approached this war from the start by saying, yes, this is crucial to America's national interests, Ukraine must win, or at least it must conclude this war on terms that enable it to defend itself. We are going to continue supplying Ukraine with military aid, and he was going to make that position clear here, and he was going to really argue the case for why Ukraine is important to American national interests. And he followed that through with action. If he was delivering, long-range missile systems as part of an aid package, rather than just, agreeing to sell weapons to Europe to be used in Ukraine, which is the current position, then maybe Putin would take that more seriously.
But that's the point, isn't it? That Trump doesn't actually care that much about the issue or about Ukraine or about the region. He'd be much happily focused elsewhere, whether that's in the Americas, as we'll discuss, or on China and some of his buddies in the Gulf states. He doesn't actually seem to me to care that much. And when diplomacy is such a personal, informal thing as it is nowadays under Trump, you'd need buy-in, right? That's why the strike on Doha was so important, because it was an affront to Trump's pride.
Right.
It wasn't really about the Gazans. It wasn't really about some grand strategy that he had. It was really, it embarrassed him. So therefore he had to act. Right. I think that was part of it. And I just don't see how he feels embarrassed by Putin's success in this, and in part because he sees Putin as this friend or as his peer, as his equal, right?
He sees him as his equal. Yeah, he sees him as his equal. He has made repeated comments in the past about the size of Russia's nuclear arsenal, Russia being one of the main nuclear powers. And he sees him. Yeah, right. So he's very impressed by the amount of real estate that Putin has access to. But to be more serious, he has also repeatedly made clear that, you're right. His main interest in this war is that it ends. It does seem, people say he is genuinely affected by the images in particular. He is very affected by the footage of the aftermath of missile strikes. He seems to be genuinely moved by the amount of dying and terrible casualties that are involved with this war. He wants it to end, but he's also made very clear it's nothing to do with him. Like, he has repeatedly said, this is Biden's war. This is a Democrat war. This is a war that would never have happened if I had been in power. He's called it a loser. Like, these are not the kind of setup to convince Putin that, yes, he is genuinely serious and he's going to devote considerable resources to this, and he does mean what he says, and Putin, really should take him seriously. Because, like, Putin also isn't in a great situation. Like, the Russian economy is really struggling. Russia is taking absolutely enormous casualties for very, very little progress on the ground. But the calculation he has always made is Russia can withstand that pain for longer than the West, which is fickle, which has a short attention span, and which has to answer to, a democratic electorate, so he can outlast the West. And there's nothing in Trump's approach so far that is really changing his mind.
But we have got this new sanctions package coming through Congress. They're working on these secondary sanctions to sanction those that are buying Russian oil and gas. I mean, do you think that'll have any effect? Do you think that could change the dynamic? Because that's what we needed. There needs to be something that shifts, right? That's what everyone's waiting for. And some in Congress seem to think that these sanctions could do that.
Well, so there are secondary sanctions now on India. That was the one thing that did come from that summer deadline was then India had these secondary sanctions go into place for buying Russian oil and gas. But the much bigger supporter of the war and Russia's economy is China. And so if the US really wanted to change Russia's calculus, then finding a way to pressure China and go after China on this would be much more effective. And Trump has proven that he's not prepared to do that. And on the sanctions package, I think there is broad bipartisan support for that. If Trump wanted it, he could bring that up. He could very clearly signal, I want it. It could go into effect. It was described as a sledgehammer of a bill. Those are sanctions with real teeth. So Trump could have done that at any time. He could have shown that he was really supportive of it, and he just hasn't. I think he said in the past, it's good that it's happening. But that's a long way from saying that he really supports that. He still seems to come back to, this is going to be resolved by him and Putin and maybe Zelensky sitting in a room together and thrashing this out. He wants to be the person who solves it, but he doesn't really seem to be prepared to put in the legwork and the concentration and the long-term, really hard, complex work that would be required to get this there. He just is showing he's not serious about it.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because he said tariffs have been key in preventing other conflicts. I don't know whether that's true or not, but he said that the way in which he got India or Pakistan to stop fighting one another was by threatening tariffs on both countries. So he obviously sees tariffs and sanctions and economic policy as a way in which he can enact diplomacy. But I mean, as you say, he seems slightly more reluctant to lean too far into that when it comes to Russia-Ukraine. I think you're probably right, because he wants this to be a big summit or meeting, or there needs to be a podium, there needs to be a sense of finality, and he needs to have his ego flattered out there. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I think also, I think both India and Pakistan would dispute his characterization of how that conflict
they already have many times.
Ended.
Many times.
And also, there was the problem with, again, sanctions targeting Russia is that now the US is really, the economic relationship is really dwindled. So there's definitely still a lot more that could be done in terms of targeting Russian banks and the financial system in particular. But it's not the same as, tariffs on China and this absolutely colossal trading relationship, which would have a real immediate effect. That just isn't the case with Russia. So I think that the problem is, there is more that could be done, but it would require Putin to change his mind and to decide that, yes, he should be taking Trump more seriously. And I think the dangerous part of that is that Putin is a man who miscalculates. He invaded Ukraine believing it was gonna be a walkover. So he is perfectly capable of making catastrophic decisions. And there's a real danger that he just decides he can write everything that comes out of Trump's mouth off as bluster. And there does come a point where Trump acts. And I think to the point that you made about, the strikes on Qatar and how that seemed to change things, because then it seemed like Trump himself was being humiliated and he had something on the line. I think the point that the Europeans, and Mark Rutte is in Washington today, and I'm sure he's trying to make this point, the line that they are trying to take is, look, Putin is making a fool of you. Like, you acknowledge yourself, he's feeding you a lot of bullshit. He says a lot of things and then he just ignores it and continues to attack Ukraine. I think the point of possible leverage for the Europeans and the Ukrainians is if they can convince Trump eventually that, yeah, Putin is playing him for a fool. He's making him look silly. He's making him a laughingstock. And so Trump is going to need to change his mind and take some real serious steps. So there's certainly a possibility that Putin miscalculates and that he's carried away by what seems to be quite extraordinary overconfidence, as has characterized much of his behavior during this war. I did just want to throw back a question to you on, we mentioned eternal peace in the Middle East.
Right.
I know you've done a lot of reporting on this. What are you hearing about, is there confidence that the current ceasefire is going to hold? How would you describe the outlook there as we stand this week?
Well, pretty bleak. Everyone I've been speaking to in the past 2 weeks, so since the idea of a ceasefire and a deal was first mooted and put out there, has been quite clear that they see this as just a ceasefire, not a peace plan, not a new future for the Middle East. It's just a very simple stopping of the war and exchanging of gunfire. That's not happened. We've seen the IDF and Hamas still fight one another, and but there's been skirmishes and conflict has broken out. There's still a lot of anger within Israel that some of the bodies of the hostages haven't been returned. JD Vance has been over there. We know Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff have also been there. So there's this push from the administration, at least, to try and get the Israelis to stick to the plan for a bit longer. I think it's interesting once Trump takes his eye off this, whether he'll care that much. I mean, in a way, he's already declared it to be a peace plan, and he's not going to admit that he was wrong just because the facts on the ground have changed. And for him to get back involved and therefore guarantee the peace plan would require him to do that, which seems like too great a cost to his pride and image. So it's a very funny situation whereby you have the US essentially declaring a peace plan that seems to be at risk, but then at the same time potentially not willing to apply the pressure that needs to be applied in order for that peace plan to actually materialize.